Sarah Martinez sat in the corner booth of Bella's Café, her weathered hands wrapped around a steaming mug of black coffee. To anyone watching, she looked like just another middle-aged woman enjoying her morning routine. Gray streaks peppered her dark hair, and laugh lines framed her brown eyes. She wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans, nothing that would draw attention. But the three men who had been eyeing her for the past 20 minutes saw something different. They saw an easy target. A woman alone. Vulnerable. They had no idea they were looking at a former Navy SEAL who had survived 18 months in enemy territory, who could kill a man with her bare hands, and who had sworn never to be a victim again. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who look the most ordinary. This is the story of what happens when predators choose the wrong prey. Sarah Martinez checked her watch as she pushed through the glass doors of Bella's Café. 7:30 in the morning, just like every Tuesday for the past 6 months since she'd moved to this quiet suburb outside Denver. The familiar smell of fresh coffee and baked pastries welcomed her, a small comfort in a life that had been turned upside down too many times. The morning crowd was typical for a weekday. Business people grabbing their caffeine fix before heading to offices, a few college students hunched over laptops, and the usual collection of retirees who treated the cafe like their personal social club. Sarah preferred the predictability of it all. After 20 years in the Navy, with the last 8 as a SEAL, she craved ordinary moments. The usual, Sarah, called Maria from behind the counter. The young barista had a bright smile that reminded Sarah of her younger sister. "You know it," Sarah replied, sliding a $5 bill across the counter. "Large black coffee and one of those blueberry muffins if they're still warm." "Just came out of the oven 10 minutes ago," Maria said, wrapping the muffin in a paper napkin. "You're lucky." Sarah found her regular spot in the corner booth that gave her a clear view of both entrances and most of the dining area. Old habits died hard. Even though she'd been officially retired from active duty for 3 years, her training remained automatic. Scan for exits. Identify potential threats. Maintain situational awareness. She pulled out her tablet and opened the novel she'd been reading, but her eyes kept drifting to the 3 men who had walked in shortly after her. They didn't fit the usual morning crowd. Too rough around the edges, too alert, too interested in everything except ordering coffee. The first man was tall and lean with arms covered in prison tattoos. His eyes constantly swept the room like he was casing the place. The second was shorter but built like a brick wall, with scarred knuckles that spoke of too many fights. The third seemed to be their leader, a wiry man with cold gray eyes and a predatory smile. They ordered coffee but barely touched it, spending most of their time whispering and glancing around the cafe. Sarah's instincts, honed by years of combat and survival training, began to whisper warnings. These men weren't here for breakfast. 20 minutes passed. The morning rush thinned out as people headed to work and school. The cafe grew quieter, more isolated. Sarah noticed the 3 men paying particular attention to the remaining customers, especially the women. Their behavior reminded her of hunters selecting their prey. A young mother with a toddler left through the front entrance. An elderly couple shuffled out the side door. A businesswoman in a sharp suit hurried away with her phone pressed to her ear. Each departure seemed to increase the tension emanating from the 3 men's table. Sarah kept reading, but every muscle in her body was coiled and ready. She'd learned in Afghanistan and Iraq that trouble often announced itself in subtle ways. A change in conversation patterns. Shifting body language. The way predators' eyes followed potential victims. The gray-eyed leader stood up and walked to the counter, ostensibly to get a refill. But Sarah noticed how his gaze lingered on Maria, who was now alone behind the register. The other morning staff had disappeared into the kitchen. "Quiet morning," he said to Maria, leaning across the counter with that cold smile. "You work here alone much?" Maria stepped back slightly, her smile becoming forced. "Oh, no sir. We always have plenty of staff. My manager's just in the back room." "That's good," the man said, his tone suggesting he knew she was lying. "Pretty girl like you shouldn't be alone. Never know what kind of dangerous people might walk in." The threat in his voice was barely concealed. Sarah's hands tightened around her coffee mug. In her peripheral vision, she saw his two companions shifting in their seats, positioning themselves to block the main exit. Maria's face went pale. "Can I get you anything else?" "Maybe," the man said, straightening up. He looked around the nearly empty cafe again, his eyes settling on Sarah for a long moment. She kept her expression neutral, playing the part of a distracted reader. The leader returned to his table, and the whispered conversation intensified. Sarah caught fragments despite their attempts at secrecy. They were discussing timing, exits, and something about the old lady in the corner being a potential problem. She almost smiled at that. If they only knew that the old lady had spent 8 years as one of the most lethal operators in the United States military. That she'd survived ambushes, firefights, and torture that would break most people. That she'd killed enemy combatants with everything from sniper rifles to improvised weapons. But they didn't know. They saw what they expected to see, a middle-aged woman reading a book, minding her own business. Someone who wouldn't fight back. Someone who might even help them if they played their cards right. The front door chimed again, and Sarah's blood chilled. A teenage girl, probably 16 or 17, walked in wearing a school uniform. She was petite, blonde, and exactly the type these predators seemed to prefer. The girl approached the counter, digging through her backpack for her wallet. The three men's attention focused on her like lasers. They exchanged quick glances and nods. Whatever they'd been planning was about to happen. Sarah slowly closed her tablet and set it aside. She took a long sip of coffee, using the motion to scan the cafe one more time. The kitchen staff was still out of sight. A lone businessman in the far corner had his head buried in his laptop, oblivious to the growing tension. Maria and the teenage girl were the only other people in the immediate area. The gray-eyed leader checked his watch and nodded to his companions. They began to move. It was starting. The shorter, muscular man walked toward the front door and turned the deadbolt. The sound of the lock clicking into place seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet cafe. The businessman looked up, confused, but before he could react, the tattooed man grabbed him by the collar and shoved him toward a storage closet. "Nobody needs to get hurt," the leader called out, producing a knife from his jacket. The blade caught the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. "Everyone just stay calm and do what you're told," Maria screamed. The teenage girl dropped her backpack and stumbled backward, her face white with terror. The businessman disappeared into the closet with a muffled shout and the sound of the door slamming shut. "Please," Maria whispered, her hands shaking as she raised them. "We don't keep much cash here. The register only has maybe $100. The leader laughed, a sound like broken glass. "Who said anything about money, sweetheart?" Sarah remained perfectly still in her booth, every fiber of her being calculating distances, angles, and possibilities. 3 armed men. 2 potential victims. Multiple escape routes blocked. The kitchen staff could emerge at any moment, adding more innocent bystanders to the equation. She faced worse odds in Somalia. The leader pointed his knife at the teenage girl. "Come here." The girl shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Please, I just wanted coffee. I have to get to school." "School's cancelled," the tattooed man said, moving to block her path to the counter. "Come on, don't make this harder than it needs to be." The girl looked around desperately, her eyes finding Sarah's for just a moment. In that split second, Sarah saw herself 25 years ago. Young, scared, helpless. The night that had changed everything and ultimately led her to the military. She'd sworn that night that she would never be helpless again. And she'd extended that promise to include never letting others be helpless while she had the power to act. The muscular man grabbed the girl's arm. She cried out in pain and terror. That was enough. Sarah stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and calm. All 3 men turned toward her, probably expecting pleas or screams or desperate negotiations. "Let her go," Sarah said quietly. The leader tilted his head, studying her like she was an interesting puzzle. "Excuse me?" "The girl." "Let her go," and I won't hurt you." For a moment, silence filled the cafe. Then, all three men began to laugh. "Lady," the tattooed man said, "you picked the wrong day to play hero. Sit back down and shut up, or you'll end up worse than them." Sarah took a step forward. "I said let her go." The leader's smile vanished. He pointed the knife at Sarah now. "Are you deaf? My friend just gave you good advice. Take it." "Here's some advice for you," Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Walk away now. Leave through that door, get in whatever vehicle brought you here, and drive away. Do that, and everyone stays healthy." "Or what?" the muscular man challenged, releasing the girl and turning his full attention to Sarah. "What's one old broad gonna do against three of us?" Sarah's eyes went cold. Combat mode engaged automatically, like slipping on a familiar uniform. Her breathing regulated. Her heart rate slowed. Time seemed to stretch and clarify. "You're about to find out." The tattooed man rushed her first, probably expecting to overwhelm her with size and aggression. He outweighed her by at least 60 pounds and had the confidence of someone who'd won fights through intimidation and brute force. He had no idea he was attacking a woman who'd spent 8 years learning how to kill people efficiently and silently. Sarah sidestepped his charge, grabbed his extended arm, and used his momentum to drive his face into the corner of a nearby table. The impact made a sickening crunch. He hit the floor and didn't move. The muscular man cursed and charged next, swinging wild punches. Sarah ducked under his first swing, drove her elbow into his solar plexus, and followed with a precise strike to his throat. He dropped to his knees, gasping and clutching his neck. The leader with the knife had been moving too, but Sarah's efficiency with his companions made him hesitate. That hesitation cost him the initiative. She closed the distance between them before he could react, caught his knife hand at the wrist, and applied pressure to specific nerve points she'd memorized years ago. His fingers went numb, and the knife clattered to the floor. "Impossible," he whispered, staring at her like she'd just materialized from another dimension. 20 years Navy, Sarah said, maintaining her grip on his wrist. 8 years as a SEAL. 3 combat deployments. You picked the wrong woman." She applied slightly more pressure, and he dropped to his knees with a grunt of pain. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. The gray-eyed leader knelt on the cafe floor, his wrist trapped in Sarah's iron grip, trying to process what had just happened. His 2 companions lay unconscious around them like discarded toys. The tattooed man wasn't moving at all, blood pooling beneath his face where it had connected with the table corner. The muscular one wheezed and gasped, still clutching his throat. "This isn't possible," the leader muttered, his voice strained with pain and disbelief. "You're just some housewife. Some soccer mom." Sarah increased the pressure on the nerve cluster in his wrist, watching his face contort with agony. Wrong on both counts. Maria stood frozen behind the counter, her mouth open in shock. The teenage girl had backed against the wall, tears still streaming down her face, but her expression had shifted from terror to amazement. Neither of them had ever seen anything like what had just unfolded. "Should I call the police?" Maria whispered. "Not yet," Sarah said, her eyes never leaving the leader's face. "We're going to have a conversation first." She guided him to one of the cafe chairs, applying just enough pressure to keep him compliant. Years of interrogating captured enemies had taught her how to read people, how to extract information, how to make someone understand that cooperation was their only viable option. "What's your name?" she asked. "Go to hell." Sarah pressed her thumb against a specific point on his hand, sending lightning bolts of pain up his arm. "Let's try again. What's your name?" "Marcus," he gasped. "Marcus Webb. Good. Now, Marcus, you're going to tell me exactly what you and your friends plan to do here today." Marcus glanced around the cafe, probably looking for an escape route or some way to regain control of the situation. Sarah followed his gaze and understood what he was thinking. The front door was still locked. His unconscious friends weren't going to provide any help. The kitchen staff hadn't emerged, which meant they were probably hiding or had slipped out the back exit. "We just wanted money," he lied. This was supposed to be a simple robbery. Sarah's grip tightened. During her years as a SEAL, she'd learned to spot deception as easily as most people recognized their own reflection. Marcus's body language, the way his eyes shifted, the slight change in his breathing pattern all screamed dishonesty. "Try again," she said. "And, remember, I've interrogated enemy combatants who were a lot tougher than you." Marcus swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cafe's comfortable temperature. "I don't know what you want me to say." "The truth would be refreshing," Sarah replied. "You weren't here for money. You locked the door, separated the potential victims, and made comments about the girl's appearance. This was planned, organized, and had nothing to do with robbery." The teenager, who had been listening to every word, stepped forward slightly. "They were going to hurt us, weren't they?" Sarah nodded grimly. "More than hurt, I think." Marcus's silence confirmed her suspicions. She'd seen enough evil in her military career to recognize the signs. These weren't desperate criminals looking for quick cash. They were predators who had selected this cafe, this timing, these specific victims for reasons that had nothing to do with financial gain. "How many others?" Sarah asked. "What? How many other women have you done this to?" Marcus shook his head. "I want a lawyer." "You're not under arrest yet," Sarah pointed out. "This is just a conversation between two people. Though that could change very quickly, depending on how helpful you decide to be." She released his wrist but remained close enough to react if he tried anything stupid. Marcus rubbed the circulation back into his hand, his eyes darting between Sarah and the exits like a trapped animal. "You have no idea who you're messing with," he said, some of his earlier confidence returning. "We're not just three random guys. We have connections. People who will come looking for us." "Connections?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You mean this is part of something bigger?" The fear in Marcus's eyes suggested he'd revealed more than he intended. Sarah had suspected this might be more than a random crime. The coordination, the way they'd studied the cafe's patterns, the casual confidence with which they'd approached their victims all pointed to experience. "Tell me about these connections," she continued. "I'm not saying anything else." Sarah pulled out her phone and started dialing. "That's fine. I'm sure the police will be very interested in your story. Along with the FBI, since this sounds like it might involve trafficking." "Wait," Marcus said quickly. "You don't understand. If you call the cops, you're signing your own death warrant. These people don't leave loose ends." "Then, you'd better start talking." Marcus looked around the cafe again, his desperation growing more obvious by the second. The tattooed man groaned softly from the floor, showing signs of regaining consciousness. The muscular one had managed to sit up against a wall but was still struggling to breathe normally. "There's a network," Marcus said finally. "People who pay good money for specific types. Young, pretty, no family connections to cause problems. We scout locations, identify targets, and arrange the transfers." Sarah's stomach turned, but she kept her expression neutral. "How long has this been going on?" "Couple years. Maybe longer before I got involved." "How many victims?" Marcus shrugged, a gesture that made Sarah want to break more than just his wrist. "I don't keep count." "Guess." "Maybe 20? 30? I honestly don't know." The casual way he discussed human trafficking made Sarah's blood boil. She'd seen the aftermath of such operations during her deployments overseas. Young women disappeared into networks of exploitation and abuse, their lives destroyed for the profit and pleasure of monsters who viewed them as commodities. "Who runs it?" "I can't tell you that. They'll kill me." "And if you don't tell me, I'll kill you," Sarah said quietly. The threat in her voice was unmistakable and completely believable. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, clearly trying to assess whether she was bluffing. Whatever he saw in her eyes convinced him she wasn't. There's a guy called Vincent Russo, he said reluctantly. He handles the business side. Has connections with buyers in different states, sometimes international. We provide the merchandise. Where do I find Russo? He operates out of an auto repair shop on the east side of the city. Russo's Custom Cars. But, you can't just walk in there. The place is fortified like a military compound. Sarah filed that information away for later consideration. How were you supposed to contact him about today's targets? Burner phone. I was supposed to call when we had them secured and ready for pickup. When? Within the next hour. Sarah glanced at her watch. If Marcus was telling the truth, Russo would be expecting confirmation of a successful operation very soon. When that call didn't come, he might send reinforcements or simply disappear until the heat died down. How many others work for him? Directly? Maybe 6 or 7 guys like us. But, he has connections throughout the city. Cops, politicians, business owners. Anyone who tries to move against him usually ends up dead or disappeared. The teenage girl, who had been listening to the entire conversation, spoke up again. My God, how many girls has this monster taken? Marcus looked at her with something that might have been shame or simply fear of consequences. Look, kid, this wasn't personal. It's just business. Sarah grabbed him by the front of his shirt and lifted him out of the chair. Despite being several inches shorter and significantly lighter, she had no trouble manhandling him. Business? You call destroying lives business? People pay for what they want, Marcus said defensively. We just provide a service. You provide slavery. Whatever. Point is, you can't stop it. Take down Russo, and someone else will step in within a week. There's too much money involved. Sarah released him, but her mind was already working on the problem. During her military career, she'd participated in operations designed to dismantle terrorist networks, drug cartels, and other criminal organizations. The key was always to cut off the head while simultaneously destroying the infrastructure. Tell me about the buyers, she said. I don't know much about that side. Russo handles all the client relationships. We just grab the girls and deliver them to a warehouse downtown. After that, it's not our problem. What warehouse? Marcus hesitated again, but another look at Sarah's face convinced him to cooperate. Old textile factory on 7th Street. Building's been abandoned for years, but Russo renovated part of it as a holding facility. How many girls are there right now? I don't know. Could be none, could be a dozen. Depends on recent acquisitions and pending shipments. Sarah felt sick thinking about young women trapped in that warehouse, waiting to be sold like cattle. But she also felt something else, a familiar sense of purpose that she hadn't experienced since leaving the military. This was a mission worth pursuing. Last question, she said. How do I get inside that warehouse? You don't, Marcus said emphatically. Even if you could get past the security, which you can't, Russo would have you hunted down and killed within hours. These aren't street criminals you can intimidate or fight. They're connected, organized, and ruthless. Let me worry about that. Sarah pulled out her phone again and dialed 911. I need police and paramedics at Bella's Café on Maple Street. 3 suspects involved in attempted kidnapping and human trafficking. 2 unconscious, 1 secured. Marcus's eyes widened. You can't call the cops. I told you, Russo has people everywhere. Then, you'd better hope they're not working today, Sarah replied. She turned to Maria and the teenager. Are you both okay? Any injuries? They shook their heads, though both still looked shaken by the morning's events. Good. When the police arrive, tell them everything you witnessed. Don't leave out any details about what these men plan to do. What about you? The teenager asked. Where will you be? Sarah looked at the 3 criminals, thinking about the warehouse full of victims and the network of predators that needed to be dismantled. I have some errands to run. Sirens were already approaching in the distance. 3 hours later, Sarah sat in her car across the street from Russo's custom cars, studying the building through a pair of military-grade binoculars. Marcus had been right about the security. The auto repair shop looked ordinary from the outside, but Sarah's trained eye caught the subtle signs of a fortified position. Security cameras at multiple angles, reinforced doors, windows with bulletproof glass, and at least 2 guards positioned where they could monitor all approaches. She'd spent the time since leaving the cafe preparing for what came next. First, a quick stop at her apartment to retrieve equipment she'd hoped never to use again. Body armor, night vision goggles, tactical communications gear, and weapons that weren't exactly legal for civilian ownership but which she'd acquired through military contacts who understood that some veterans needed extra protection in their post-service lives. Second, she'd contacted Detective Lisa Morrison, one of the few honest cops she'd encountered during her transition to civilian life. Morrison had worked human trafficking cases before and could be trusted to coordinate with federal agencies while keeping Russo's potential police connections in the dark. "Sarah, what you're describing sounds like a military operation," Morrison had said during their phone conversation. "You need to let law enforcement handle this." "With respect, Detective, law enforcement has been handling it for years while girls kept disappearing. Sometimes you need a different approach. This isn't Afghanistan. You can't just eliminate targets without due process." "I'm not planning to eliminate anyone unless they force me to," Sarah had replied. "But those girls in that warehouse don't have time for due process." Now, as she watched the auto shop, Sarah was finalizing her plan. The building had 3 potential entry points: the main garage doors in front, a service entrance on the north side, and what appeared to be a loading dock in the rear. The cameras covered all approaches, but there were blind spots that could be exploited with proper timing and positioning. Her phone buzzed with a text from Detective Morrison: "FBI task force is being assembled. ETA 2 hours. Do not attempt entry until they arrive." Sarah deleted the message without responding. 2 hours was too long. If Russo suspected that his operation had been compromised, he might move the victims or simply eliminate them as evidence. She'd seen similar scenarios play out during military operations where delay meant the difference between rescue and recovery. At 4:30 in the afternoon, the auto shop's legitimate business began winding down. Several customers picked up their vehicles, and most of the daytime mechanics left through the front entrance. By 5 o'clock, only the security personnel and Russo's core criminal operation remained. Sarah moved to a different surveillance position and began her approach. She'd learned during her SEAL training that the best way to infiltrate a secured facility was to become invisible rather than trying to fight through defenses. Stealth, patience, and precise timing were more effective than superior firepower. The service entrance on the north side was watched by a single camera with a predictable rotation pattern. Sarah timed the gaps and slipped into the camera's blind spot just as a delivery truck rumbled past on the main street, masking any sound of her approach. The door was locked, but standard commercial locks presented no challenge to someone trained in covert entry techniques. She was inside within 30 seconds, moving through what appeared to be a break room toward the main garage area. Voices echoed from deeper in the building. Sarah moved carefully, using the cover of parked cars and automotive equipment to mask her approach. Through a partially open door, she could see into an office where 2 men were discussing business. "Marcus hasn't checked in," one of them was saying. "Something went wrong." "Could be anything," replied a voice she assumed belonged to Vincent Russo. "Maybe they're just taking their time with the merchandise. Or maybe they got arrested. We should move the current inventory tonight, just to be safe." "Already arranged. Truck comes at 8. We'll transfer everything to the backup location until this cools down." Sarah checked her watch. 6:15. Less than 2 hours before the victims would be moved to another location where she might never find them. She continued through the building, methodically clearing each room and mapping the layout in her mind. The garage area contained several expensive cars in various stages of repair or modification. The office held filing cabinets that probably contained evidence of the trafficking operation. But, so far, no sign of the warehouse or holding area that Marcus had described. A staircase in the back corner led to a basement level. That was where she found them. The basement had been converted into a series of small holding cells, each equipped with a cot, a bucket, and nothing else. Sarah counted 8 cells. 6 contained young women ranging in age from approximately 16 to 25. They were clean and appeared to be fed, but the terror in their eyes was unmistakable. "Who are you?" whispered a blonde girl who couldn't have been older than 18. "I'm here to get you out," Sarah replied quietly. "How many guards are down here?" "2," said another victim. "They come down every few hours to check on us." "Where are they now?" "Upstairs somewhere. They left about 10 minutes ago." Sarah examined the cell doors. Simple keypad locks, probably connected to a central control system. She could try to hack them electronically, but that would take time and might trigger alarms. Better to find the manual override or force the issue when she had better tactical control. "Listen carefully," she told the prisoners. "My name is Sarah. I'm former military, and I'm going to get all of you out of here safely. But I need you to stay quiet and do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that?" They nodded eagerly, hope replacing some of the fear in their faces. "Good. I'm going upstairs to deal with the guards. When I come back, be ready to move quickly and quietly. We're going to get out of here together." Sarah made her way back upstairs, her mind shifting into full combat mode. She'd identified at least 4 hostiles, Russo and 3 other men. Possibly more. They were armed and operating in familiar territory, but they weren't expecting a professional assault. She found the first guard in the garage, smoking a cigarette and watching a television mounted on the wall. Sarah approached from behind, applied a sleeper hold she'd learned in advanced combat training, and lowered his unconscious body behind a workbench. The second guard was more alert, positioned where he could watch both the main entrance and the staircase to the basement. Sarah couldn't approach him directly without being seen, so she created a distraction. A wrench accidentally dropped behind him caused him to turn and investigate, giving her the opening she needed. That left Russo and at least 1 other man in the office. Sarah could hear their voices growing more agitated as they discussed the failure to hear from Marcus and his crew. "I'm telling you, something's wrong," the unknown voice insisted. "We should evacuate now and re-establish somewhere else." "And lose a week's worth of preparation?" Russo countered. "No. We move the inventory tonight as planned, then lay low for a few days." Sarah positioned herself outside the office door and listened for movement patterns. 2 men, both armed based on the sound of holsters creaking when they shifted position. Russo was behind the desk, the other man near the window. She needed them both alive for interrogation and testimony, which complicated her tactical options. Dead criminals couldn't provide information about the broader network or testify against corrupt officials. Sarah took a deep breath, checked her equipment one final time, and made her move. She kicked the office door open and rolled to the side as both men reached for their weapons. The guard by the window was faster, but his shot went wide as Sarah came up firing. Her non-lethal round from a tactical beanbag gun caught him center mass, sending him crashing into the window. Russo had his pistol halfway out of its holster when Sarah's second shot dropped him behind the desk, gasping and stunned but very much alive. "Vincent Russo," she said, stepping into the office with her weapon trained on both men. "We need to talk." Russo struggled to catch his breath, his face twisted with pain and confusion. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone whose morning you ruined," Sarah replied. "Your boys Marcus, Danny, and Jake tried to kidnap a teenager and a young barista from Bella's Café this morning. They made the mistake of trying it while I was having my coffee." Recognition dawned in Russo's eyes. "You're the one who took down my crew." "That's right. And now I'm here to shut down your entire operation." She zip-tied both men's hands behind their backs and secured them to heavy furniture where they couldn't escape or reach any hidden weapons. Then, she called Detective Morrison. "Sarah, where are you?" Morrison demanded when she answered. "Russo's custom cars. I have Vincent Russo and 3 of his associates secured. There are 6 trafficking victims in the basement who need immediate medical attention and protective custody. Damn it, Sarah, I told you to wait for the task force. The task force would have been too late. Russo was planning to move the victims tonight. How far out are your people? 20 minutes. Can you maintain security until then? Affirmative. But, Morrison, you need to be careful about which officers respond. Russo claims he has corrupt cops on his payroll. Understood. I'm bringing only federal agents and officers I personally trust. Sarah spent the next few minutes searching Russo's office and collecting evidence. Financial records, client lists, photographs of victims, and communication logs that would help investigators map the entire trafficking network. The scope was even larger than she'd imagined, with connections to similar operations in at least 4 other states. When she heard sirens approaching, she went downstairs to prepare the victims for rescue. They were all conscious and mobile, though clearly traumatized by their experience. Is it really over? Asked the blonde teenager. The immediate danger is over, Sarah said carefully. But recovery takes time. There will be interviews, medical examinations, counseling, and legal proceedings. It won't be easy, but you'll have support every step of the way. The FBI task force that arrived included agents specializing in human trafficking, victim services coordinators, and medical personnel. They processed the scene with military efficiency, collecting evidence and ensuring that the rescued women received immediate care. Detective Morrison found Sarah in the garage, watching the operation unfold. 6 victims recovered, 4 suspects in custody, and enough evidence to dismantle a multi-state trafficking network, Morrison said. Not bad for a morning that started with coffee. It started with 3 predators picking the wrong target, Sarah corrected. Everything else just followed from that. The FBI wants to debrief you extensively. This kind of intelligence coup could lead to dozens of arrests and hundreds of victims being rescued. Sarah nodded. She was prepared to share everything she knew and everything she'd discovered. But her mind was already moving beyond the immediate victory. Morrison, how many other operations like this are running in our city right now? Too many. Human trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar industry. We shut down one network, and 2 more take its place. Then, we'd better get to work. 3 months later, Sarah received a letter from Maria, the barista from Bella's Café. The young woman had decided to study criminal justice and was planning to join law enforcement after graduation. You showed me that one person can make a difference, she wrote. I want to be that person for someone else. The teenage victim from the cafe had also written, describing her recovery process and her determination to help other trafficking survivors. You saved more than just my life that morning, her letter said. You showed me that I don't have to be a victim forever. Sarah kept both letters on her desk in the small office she'd rented downtown. The sign on the door read Martinez Security Consulting, but most of her work involved something quite different. She'd partnered with Detective Morrison and the FBI's anti-trafficking task force to identify and dismantle criminal networks throughout the region. Her military background, combined with her willingness to operate in gray areas that limited traditional law enforcement, made her uniquely effective at penetrating criminal organizations. She'd become the nightmare that kept predators awake at night, an invisible hunter who could appear anywhere, anytime, to rescue their victims and destroy their operations. The phone on her desk rang, and she answered it knowing it was probably another case, another group of criminals who had no idea they were about to meet their match. Martinez Consulting. Sarah, it's Morrison. We just got a tip about a new operation running out of a trucking company on the south side. Sounds like they're moving girls across state lines. Sarah reached for her tactical bag, checking to make sure her equipment was ready. Some battles never truly ended, but that didn't mean they weren't worth fighting. Send me the address, she said. Looks like someone else picked the wrong woman. Outside her office window, the city hummed with its usual mix of ordinary people living ordinary lives, most of them unaware of the predators that moved among them or the quiet war being fought to protect the innocent. Sarah preferred it that way. She had work to do.